I found out my wife wants an open marriage for me, got surgery to avoid kids, and won't be intimate. Hey Reddit. I thought we were happy, or at least I thought we were on the same page about what we wanted in life. But everything changed when my wife sat me down one evening with a look on her face that made my stomach drop before she even spoke. I knew something was coming. She started by saying she had been thinking a lot about our future, about what we both wanted, and about how she felt we should move forward. That alone made me uneasy because usually, when someone talks like that, it's never good. But I nodded, trying to keep calm, waiting for her to explain. Then, she dropped the first bombshell. She told me she wanted to open our marriage, but only for me. At first, I thought I misheard her. My mind was scrambling to make sense of her words. Was this some kind of test? A trick? Was she trying to see if I'd jump at the idea of being with someone else so she could accuse me of not loving her enough? I asked her to clarify, and she said she had been reflecting on herself and her feelings, and she realized that she no longer had the same drive for physical intimacy that she used to. She assured me she still loved me, still wanted to be married, and still cared about our life together. But when it came to that aspect of our relationship, she just didn't have the desire anymore. So, in her mind, the best solution was to allow me to be with other people so I wouldn't feel trapped in a marriage where my needs weren't being met. I just sat there, staring at her, trying to process what she was saying. It didn't make sense. It wasn't just about the physical aspect for me, it was about the connection, the bond, the closeness we had always shared. And now she was telling me that part of our marriage was gone. That she had decided it wasn't important to her anymore, so she was just going to let me go out and get that elsewhere while she stayed completely uninvolved. My mind was screaming at me, telling me this wasn't right, that there had to be more to this, that she had to be hiding something. But before I could even formulate a response, she hit me with the second bombshell. She told me she had undergone surgery to make sure she could never have kids. She hadn't told me she was planning it, hadn't even brought it up as a discussion. She just made the decision on her own and went through with it, completely shutting down a conversation we were supposed to have together. She knew I wanted kids. We had talked about it before. Sure, we weren't planning on having them right now, but I always thought that was part of our future. And now, that future had been erased without my input, without any warning. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. She sat there, looking at me with what I could only describe as a mix of nervousness and expectation, as if she was waiting for me to thank her for being so considerate of my needs by opening the marriage or to somehow accept that she had unilaterally decided one of the biggest aspects of our future without me. I finally managed to speak, but my voice felt foreign to me, like it didn't belong to my body. I asked her why. Why had she done this? Why hadn't she talked to me first? Her answer was vague, something about how she had been feeling this way for a long time and just didn't know how to bring it up, so she took action instead. That she didn't want to burden me with the stress of a difficult conversation. That she had been struggling with these thoughts for months, maybe even years, and she had finally decided to do what she felt was best for herself. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was my wife, the person I had vowed to share my life with, to make decisions with, to build a future with. And she had been making monumental, irreversible choices without me like I was just a passenger in my own marriage. I told her I needed time to think, that I couldn't process everything she had just unloaded on me all at once. She seemed disappointed, almost like she had expected me to just accept it and move on. But she nodded and gave me space. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept running in circles, trying to make sense of everything. Was this really happening? Was my marriage over? Could I even come back from this? The next morning, things felt even worse. The weight of what she had done, what she had decided for both of us without my consent, was crushing me. And yet, she was acting like everything was normal, like she had just given me some big gift by offering me freedom outside of our marriage while she withdrew from the intimacy we had once shared. I started questioning everything. Had she ever really loved me the way I thought she did? Had she ever wanted the same things I wanted? Had she been pretending this whole time? And if she had, why? Why go through all of this just to pull the rug out from under me years later? I wanted answers, but at the same time, I was terrified of what those answers might be. I didn't know what to do. Was I supposed to just accept this? Was I supposed to walk away from the marriage I had invested so much in? Could I ever forgive her for making these decisions without me? I needed to talk to someone. I needed to get another perspective because right now, my head was a storm of emotions, and I couldn't tell if I was overreacting or if I was justified in feeling as devastated as I did. So I reached out to a close friend, the only person I felt I could trust with something this personal. I told them everything, laid it all out, and waited for their response. And when they finally spoke, their words hit me harder than anything my wife had said. They told me I needed to be honest with myself. That I needed to ask myself if I could ever truly be happy in a marriage where my needs, my desires, and my dreams for the future had been dismissed so easily. They said something that stuck with me: a marriage is built on two people making decisions together. If one person starts making those decisions alone, is it even a marriage anymore? That was the question that haunted me the most. Because deep down, I already knew the answer. I wasn't ready to confront it yet, but I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. I had to talk to my wife again. I had to get more answers. And I had to figure out if there was anything left to salvage, or if I was just holding on to something that was already gone. I decided to sit down with her that evening and tell her everything I was feeling. But what she said next would change everything even more. Update. That evening, I sat my wife down again, determined to get answers. I wasn't going to let her brush this off or act like it was just some minor change in our marriage that I should simply adjust to. I needed to understand how she could make such massive, life-altering decisions without me. I needed to know what had led her to this point. But most of all, I needed to know if there was any way forward for us, or if I was just desperately clinging to something that was already falling apart. She sat across from me, calm, almost indifferent, while I was barely holding myself together. I started by asking her to explain everything again, to walk me through her thought process. She sighed like she was already tired of the conversation but indulged me anyway. She told me that for a long time, she had felt differently about our relationship but didn't know how to bring it up. She had been losing interest in physical intimacy for years, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't force herself to feel something that wasn't there anymore. She said it had nothing to do with me, that I hadn't done anything wrong, but she just didn't have that desire anymore. And because she knew how important that aspect of our relationship was to me, she thought the best way to handle it was to allow me to seek it elsewhere while still staying married. I asked her if she even wanted to be married to me anymore. I needed to hear it directly from her. If she no longer had the desire to be intimate, if she had unilaterally decided that we would never have children, then what was left? What kind of marriage was this supposed to be? She hesitated for a moment, and that hesitation told me everything before she even opened her mouth. But then she finally said that she still loved me, still cared about me, and still wanted to be with me, just in a way that made sense for her. She saw our marriage as a partnership, a lifelong companionship, but not necessarily one that needed intimacy or a family to be fulfilling for her. That hit me harder than I expected. Because for me, marriage wasn't just about companionship, it was about all of it. The love, the connection, the shared experiences, the dreams of building a future together. And she had already stripped away two of the biggest parts of that future. She made it sound so simple, like it was just a shift in how she viewed relationships, but for me, it felt like she had rewritten the rules of our marriage without my consent. I asked her why she never talked to me about it before making these decisions. She just shrugged and said she was afraid of how I would react. That if she had told me beforehand, I might have tried to change her mind or convince her to wait, and she didn't want to be influenced by anyone else's opinion. She wanted to make the decision for herself, on her terms, and while I could understand the need to be independent, the need to make choices that felt right for her, I couldn't understand how she could do that without even considering how it would affect me. I told her that I needed time. I couldn't just pretend that everything was fine. I couldn't just accept this new version of our marriage without processing what it meant for me. She seemed disappointed but nodded, saying she understood. But the way she said it, the way she looked at me, it felt like she had already made peace with whatever outcome this conversation would lead to. And that terrified me more than anything. I spent the next few days lost in my own thoughts, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do. Was I willing to stay in a marriage that no longer felt like a marriage? Could I live with knowing that my wife had changed our entire future without even asking me? And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that deep down, I already knew the answer. I just wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. Another update. After days of agonizing over everything, I finally decided to talk to her again. I had spent too long avoiding the truth, hoping that somehow, some way, I would find a way to accept what she had done and move forward. But the truth was, I couldn't. I couldn't pretend that I was okay with my wife making life-altering choices without me. I couldn't pretend that a marriage without intimacy or the possibility of children was what I had signed up for. And I couldn't pretend that I wasn't deeply hurt by the way she had handled everything. So, I sat her down and told her everything. I told her that I felt betrayed, that I felt like my voice had been completely erased from our marriage, that she had made decisions for both of us as if my feelings didn't matter. I told her that I wasn't angry because she had changed. People change, that's part of life. I was angry because she had taken away my choice. She had decided everything for me and then expected me to just go along with it. She listened quietly, barely reacting, and when I was done, she simply said, "I understand." That was it. No argument, no fight, no attempt to convince me that I was wrong or that we could make it work. Just those two words. And in that moment, I realized that she had been prepared for this all along. She had known, deep down, that by making these choices, she was risking our marriage. And she had done it anyway. I asked her what she wanted now, what she saw for her future. She hesitated, but then she admitted that she had come to terms with the possibility that we might not make it. That if I couldn't accept this version of our relationship, then maybe we weren't meant to stay together. And that was the final nail in the coffin for me. Because as much as I had been struggling, as much as I had been hurting, I had still been fighting for our marriage. But she had already accepted its potential end. I told her I needed to start thinking about the next steps. About what separation would look like. And she just nodded, almost like she had been expecting it all along. That night, I packed a bag and stayed with a friend. I couldn't be in that house, in that space that no longer felt like home. And as much as I wanted to believe that this was just temporary, that maybe we could find some way to fix things, deep down, I knew the truth. Final update. It's been a few weeks since I moved out, and in that time, my wife and I have barely spoken. Not because we're angry or resentful, but because there's simply nothing left to say. The truth is, our marriage ended the moment she decided to make life-changing choices without me. And as much as I wanted to hold on to what we once had, I finally realized that I was holding on to something that no longer existed. We've started the process of separating. It's painful, but it's also a relief in a way. Because now, I don't have to wake up every day feeling like I'm living in someone else's version of my life. I don't have to pretend that I'm okay with a future that isn't mine. I can finally start moving forward and figuring out what I want for myself. Do I still love her? In some ways, yes. She was my wife, my partner, the person I thought I would spend the rest of my life with. But love isn't enough when trust and respect are gone. And at the end of the day, I deserve a marriage where my voice matters. So, this is where our story ends. And as much as it hurts, I know now that it's the only ending that makes sense.